Hello and welcome to the Wow Show, an hour full of stories from and for truck drivers on the road. We're going to have fun saying thank you for who you are and what you do as drivers. And we're going to talk to some people who know their stuff so that we can learn more. My name is David Binyachek. I'm your host. Let's get started. And welcome to the Wow Show. This is David. What an interesting week it has been. Wow. It's an interesting time to be a Canadian. This week, the blockades that had disrupted flow of economy and goods at both the Windsor border, Coutts border, and various other borders have been dismantled. Just within the last 48 hours, the government has declared a state of emergency and invoked the Emergency Act that has not been invoked in the history of our country, that gives it unprecedented powers to deal with the protests and the blockades that have popped up. Because of that, there are over 1,000 police in Ottawa trying to clear out the downtown area that is still occupied by a few trucks and a few hundred people. Bank accounts are being frozen as the list of donors to the Freedom Convoy 2022 were revealed and shared. And now the government is sharing them with institutions, financial institutions. Bank accounts are being frozen. And in the most bizarre twist of this particular week, if you're a protester that's arrested and you brought your pet, if after 8 days you can't pick it up, they're going to put it down. The strong arm of government has definitely come down to different reactions from different Canadians. I mean, did it have to come to this? Canadians are divided. Just check your Twitter account. Just 5 minutes reading Twitter, and you will realize that there is a deep divide in this country. As for myself, my history and my past has taught me to have empathy for people that have different sides or points of view or beliefs than I do. And I'm going to encourage every Canadian, every listener to this broadcast to separate people from what they believe. Because there are some awesome people that are in situations that really form their beliefs into something that I can't agree with, but I can still admire the person. I think that's important for Canadian unity. The truth is, what we believe will be determined heavily by what we consistently listen to. The environment that we place ourselves in has a huge effect on what we think is right. Almost, we are powerless. It's hard when you're in a certain environment to go counter grain and to think something else. If you were to listen to CBC News only, I think it would be fair to say that after a few months, if you heard no other conflicting viewpoints, you might be left of center politically. If you were to be forced to listen to Fox News only with no other points of reference, I think it would be fair to say that after a few months, you might come out right of center politically. Our environments are huge. And as Canadians, can I leave this message is that, you know what, there is more that unites us than divides us. And it's our current environment that is trying to tear us apart. But it doesn't have to. In the close of today's show, I want to talk about and give you my thoughts on the dark space we're in as a country. And I want to give you my thoughts on the heart transplant I believe Canada and Canadians are going through, that ultimately, a light at the end of the tunnel will help us unleash and fulfill the great promise this country has as a healing nation. The world needs Canada. It needs more of Canada. And you can't heal unless something's wrong. There's definitely a lot of things going wrong these days. But before we get to that, this show is about trucking, and yes, the Freedom Convoy started as about trucker protests against vaccine mandates for cross-border truckers, but as it rolled across Canada, it became so much more than that. And so it's not accurate to say it's purely a trucking protest anymore. It's grown way past that. But we are about trucking, and trucking is changing. Today, I want to play for you a great panel discussion that I had with three gentlemen in the industry that I respect a lot. Mr. Mike Millian, he's the president of the Private Motor Transport Council, PMTC of Canada, and he's on this particular panel. Michael Zellick is the Director of Human Resources with Wellington Motor Freight, also the recipient of the 2021 Recruiter of the Year in Canada. A great gentleman that I have a lot of respect for. And Larry Dick, owner and president of Jade Transport, one of the most beautiful fleets you'll ever see on the road, hauling liquid and other dangerous fluids, and has been doing so for a long time. The four of us are going to talk about value, specifically three main questions. Number one, if you're new to the industry, how do you create value? How do you become valuable to your company so you can have a successful career in transport? If you're new to transport, you're thinking about getting into it, you're going to want to listen to their advice, because these are the people at the other side of the table that are going to say yes or no to hiring you. Number two is it reflects on retention in the industry. How does a company show a driver that they're valued? How do they value experience? How do they value a person? And number three, the question is the value of a professional driver changing? And I believe it is. And some of you will cheer it. Some of you will bemoan it. Many of you will bemoan it. And there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with initial change, because you're bemoaning the loss of the Knights of the Road. You're bemoaning the potential loss of this work ethic and commitment and brotherhood that you saw as having been, but are questioning whether it will continue to be. The good news is that's a normal part of change. And actually, the discussion that we had today actually gave me hope. You see, I believe that this is true, that if we're going to fulfill the potential of the transport sector in Canada, North America, and otherwise, that the key to that success is going to be, no matter what it looks like, how the industry values a driver, we have to be honest about it. Knowing what to expect is key to retention of drivers. If we're not honest about who we are and who we're going to be and who we're striving to be, then this kind of impromptu poem that came to my head will be true in the industry. It will be easy to recruit. It'll be hard to retain. And that would be a colossal shame. So that's my poem of the day, but it reflects it. Coming out of the discussion, I believe that change doesn't have to mean that you lose your identity. And I was thinking of the metaphor of my father. As an immigrant to Canada after World War II, he came from Bessarabia, which was a country that was either Romania or Russia, depending on the war, Eastern European. But his village was German speaking. And so when they came to Canada, they very much brought a snapshot of that Germanic type culture to our family. And we experienced it. And there are a lot of great things about it: punctuality, hard work, commitment. As kids, it was important to be seen, not heard. Respect. Is it better or worse? No, it's not, but it was what it was. And it kind of stayed constant as I looked at my parents and my uncles and my aunts over the time that I grew up. Now, myself, spending 70% of my day in public schools and other institutions, the value system that I raised my family has attachments to what I grew up with, but, has modified because of the other influences that I've experienced. And so I think back to a trip that my wife and I took about 10 years ago to Germany. And I was curious as to what I would find. And what I found is that, while some outwardly behaviors and the outward appearance of what was going on in that society had changed, they didn't reflect the activities of my family growing up, always. The core values were still there. The core values were still there. So as you listen to my discussion with Larry and Mike and Michael, can I make this suggestion? We don't have to lose what was to find the potential of what can be. We don't have to lose what was to find the potential of what can be. Here's my panel discussion on the value of drivers and the changing value of drivers with Larry Dick, Mike Millian, and Michael Zellick. Oh, hey there, Canada. It is David and the Wow Show. Today is going to be all about value. There's a quote that if you want to become valuable, just create value. And we're going to apply value both from a recruiting perspective around how, as a prospective driver in transport, you can become valuable to your company, but also how, as a driver, how you best feel valued by your company. And we're going to ask the question, is the way that the industry is valuing drivers? And I say that, I guess, from both fronts, whether it's, strictly how much they pay you as your value, also how much they show trust and respect and know you as a person also reflects on value. There are two different categories. We're going to have that discussion. It comes, I mean, there's been shows that have talked about this before, but it comes at a time when our industry's environment is influenced by a lot of different influences, some of the primary ones being acquisitions and the formation of mega companies in the trucking industry, and companies getting larger and larger and larger. And then also down the road, not tomorrow, it's kind of the same argument as, oil and gas versus green coming up. But the ever increasing presence of the trials and actual running of autonomous driven vehicles. And so on the show today, we have got three great gentlemen. We have got Larry Dick, who is the president and owner of Jade Transport out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, liquid bulk carrier, and very well respected. I've known Larry for many years. Love what he does. We've got Michael Zellick, who is the Director of Human Resources at Wellington Motor Freight. And I am just a huge fan of what this company is doing on LinkedIn and kind of being a rebel in terms of, just challenging other transport companies to adapt cultures and attitudes that make the industry a place where people want to be a part of it. And so I'm a big fan of Michael. And then we have Mike Millian. From the PMTC, the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, and just an awesome advocate. I'll start with you, Mike, even though I introduced you at the tail end. You've got to be busy these days with the current environment. And so, are you getting enough sleep? How are things been with trying to manage public relations and the multiple sides of the convoy and everything that's going on?
Yeah, we're all busy. So yeah. It's better than the alternative, right?
Yes.
Yeah, better than having nothing to do. So yeah, it's dealing with it no different than anybody else's. So I mean, I think the key thing we have to remember is the big thing that's been on the news is all about this freedom convoy and the truck protests. And I think there's a couple things we have to look at here. We have to separate a few things. Our association was outspoken and against the border vaccine mandate from day one, before it came into effect and after it came into effect. We're also very outspoken against the proposed federal vaccine mandate that the federal government said on December 10th that they would be putting in place in early 2022. Thankfully, that one hasn't happened yet. So when this convoy first started out, they kind of talked about that. I shouldn't say before it started on social media about a vaccine protest against a vaccine ban. As soon as it hit the road, it turned into something completely and totally different. And I think we're all aware of that. So I don't need to get into the whole specifics of it and waste everybody's time, because I think everybody who's been following the news knows what it's turned into. And a couple things we have to look at. Peaceful protests are fine. They're supportive. I agree with them. That's what makes this country great. Border blockades are not legal peaceful protests. Holding the city of Ottawa hostage for 3 weeks is not a legal peaceful protest. It may be peaceful because nobody's got hurt or killed, but it still isn't peaceful when you can't safely leave your house and take your kids to school, or you don't feel that you can safely do that. And you're blocking public infrastructure in both ways. The key thing we have to remember is it's called a trucker convoy protest in a lot of cases in the media. That's not what this is. This has very little to do with the trucking industry anymore, and it has very little to do with border vaccine mandates and federal vaccine mandates. It's a whole bunch of other stuff that's been latched on to. Agree with it or don't agree with it, that's everybody's choice, the stuff that they want ended. But the majority of the trucking industry is not represented there. And it has affected the image of the industry to a lot of people in the public because the way it's been portrayed. And it should not be, because the vast majority of the industry is vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. Yes. That's your choice, whether you want to get vaccinated or not. But you can't step all over the rights and freedoms of everybody else. And you can't paint the whole trucking industry as being supportive, or the ones that actually organized this protest and blockade that's going on. I don't even want to call it a protest anymore, because it's not legal. Trucking industry is not behind this. A whole bunch of other people have grabbed onto it, organized it, and there's some truck drivers involved in it, just like there's pickup trucks and cars and everything else involved on it. So I think what keys for everybody to know is, don't think of the trucking industry as what you're seeing there. The majority of the trucking industry is out there doing what they've always done, which is getting the products and services to your shelf that you need under a much harsher atmosphere and environment that they were before. And we need to be thankful for the industry and the ones that are out there doing what we still need them to do.
That's my passion, is to be thankful for the men and women who make our economy run. It's certainly interesting times. Thank you for that, Michael, or Mike. Yeah. So for the purposes of this show, when I say Michael, I'm talking about Michael Zellick. It's Wellington Motor Freight. And when I say Mike, it's Mike Millian, president of PTMC. And Larry is Larry and Dave is Dave. Mike Zellick, tell just for people that haven't heard or haven't seen things about Wellington, talk about your fleet, talk about your role. And I want to congratulate you on, I believe it's 2021 is the year, but you were just won the recipient of the Recruiter of the Year award. And from what I've seen of you and what I know of you, so well deserved. Congratulations, my friend. Talk about what's going on at Wellington.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that. That award was probably the biggest individual highlight of my transportation career, but it wasn't just a one-man show to make that happen. It's the whole company. Obviously, a big part of that is our truck drivers, as well as the office staff, all the way up to our upper management and executive group. For those who don't know much about Wellington, we're a trucking company just west of Toronto. We've got a fleet of Sprinter vans, straight trucks. We haul dry van, reefer, step deck, roll tight. We kind of do it all. Want to be a one-stop shop for people, huge brokerage department, warehousing. And what's kind of helped put us on the map is we have industry-leading driver retention rates, where they've been in the high 90s. Ever since we've had our own equipment. We once went about a year and a half without having a single driver resign from our company, which is nearly unheard of. Yeah. And it's cool that now people kind of want to hear what the secret is. And I've got no shame in sharing the secret, because it's so simple. It's just respect your drivers, treat them well. And, as the topic of today is going to allude to, you got to show them that they are valued, and, show them that in many different ways.
Yeah. I find that so funny. It's kind of a secret to success in any industry that you're in. And that's what I love about what you guys do, both yourself and Derek and others that I've seen, is that, you don't lose when you give away your secrets. Because the truth is, people may know what you're doing, but if they've got a culture that makes that really hard to do, they're not going to do it anyways. So
I totally agree. You can't fake it. You have to develop that culture that happens over time. You can't develop the genuine interest you have in a driver's well-being. If you fake it, it's so easy to spot that. It's got to be from the heart.
Yeah, definitely. No, thank you for that. And then Larry is out in Saskatoon today. You've got now a Western branch. The company's getting bigger, run by your son, Jonathan, who's been in the Wow Trucks calendar in the past. That was about 8 or 9 years ago. And Larry, you are certainly a person that I know that invests in people. And so it would be very hard for a Jade employee, whether it be a truck driver or not to know that their company cares. And I've seen that actively over the years. And I think it's a reason for your success. I mean, any owner, anybody in business, you have to balance 3 things. You have to balance the shareholder, the customer, and the employee. And that balance is sometimes a tough thing to do. And we've got some people on this call that I think that do it right. Larry, what's new at Jade?
Things are going along pretty well. Unfortunately, with some of the vax mandates and stuff, it's inhibited a few of our guys from going. And, we've tried to practice a culture of respect and tolerance, and people have the right to choose for themselves, in my mind. So we're not here to enforce or coerce people into doing things that they don't want, or name call or cancel anybody. And because of that culture of respect, that we do respect them and as individuals in their choice. And one of our little things that we've done over the years is have all our trucks painted similar but different. And if the snowflakes can all be unique, my goodness, we can certainly have a few individual trucks or different ideas, and people really, I think, take pride in what they're doing with that. So, as far as, we have new trucks coming, that's a challenge, getting new truck equipment at all. And so you almost need to have a really good shop these days to try and keep the older stuff going as well as you can and maintain it.
Yep.
And I appreciate the people that have been willing to go south to fulfill those mandates and go across the border. That's great. We need them badly. And, a lot of our business is international, so we need those people. But there's also a place for the others. And, if everybody applies themselves and works hard and diligently at it, we'll all go forward and see better days, hopefully.
I like it. In real estate, there is buyers markets and sellers markets. Feel free to disagree with me, gentlemen, but it would be fair to say that today is a driver's market. and that flips, and that is cyclical as well. So let's get into the questions, and it's all about value, and we'll see where this goes. And maybe we'll start with Michael Zellick, and then we'll go to Mike Millian, then we'll go to Larry. But the question is this: if someone's looking at getting in the industry, how do you determine the value of a driver? So what are some attributes of someone that would make them someone that you'd want to treat well, respect, and make an employee of yours? So if someone's wondering, how can I be valuable in the industry and be successful, what are those main characteristics?
Well, the first part is just be a good person. I mean, it's obviously you're looking for good drivers, people that are safe and experienced. 10 times out of 10, I'd take a good person over a bad person, especially if the experience is comparable. You want someone that's going to be an ambassador for your company, that's going to be a good representative when they're on the road, when they're at truck stops, when they're at your customers. Yep. Realistically, these drivers are seeing the customers a lot more than anyone at your company, even the salespeople. So you definitely want them to be polite, respectful, and on time and safe, of course, kind of goes without saying, but you can't have people that are going to be causing issues behind the scenes, or that are going to, create a poison or a toxic environment for those around them. Other ways to get value for yourself as a driver is just show your intelligence. Like, truck drivers are some of the smartest people out there, and in many different ways. They've got a great knowledge of geography. They've often they're very mechanically inclined. They speak many languages at times. A lot of stuff like this is not thought of by the average Joe. When you think of your truck driver, you think it's a job that anyone can do as long as they know how to turn left, turn right, and brake, where it's so much more than that. And, as the transportation world has evolved, there's a lot more to it, where you've got to be, well aware of your hours of service. And in, the last 10 years or so, you actually have to listen to those hours of service, where, you can't just scribble something out and keep moving forward.
Eraser.
Exactly. So yeah, doing your job properly adds value to it. Taking pride in what you do, making sure that your truck looks presentable inside and outside. Be proud to be on time or early for appointments. And, if you do have a good idea, present it in a good way to, whether it's your dispatcher, someone in human resources, the company president, whoever it is. Like, if you have a good idea, they'd be foolish not to listen to it. As long as you present it in a good way, you can't go in there with a bad attitude or looking for a confrontation, but present the facts. Say, hey, I've been on the road for this long. I've noticed this about a certain run or a piece of equipment, and that adds so much value to, number one, the bottom line, but the best person to get advice from on the road is the driver that's on the road all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some companies don't get the concept that your driver is your brand.
Oh, 100%. And
Often,
they're the ones that are so visible.
Yeah, Wellington is Wellington and Jade is Jade, but the people that they meet create your brand. So that's an important point. And then the point about listening, what I love about Wellington is that, from all the stories, and I've interviewed some of your drivers, that you actually come to them. I just listened to a podcast where the gentleman was suggesting to new drivers, get to know middle management, get to know the boss of your dispatcher. Because if ever you want to, you're not in agreement with your dispatcher, it's not that you're going to tattletale or whatever, but it's good to have a relationship, to be known more than a number, and at many levels in the organization. And in your case, they don't have to run to try to find you. You're there talking to them, which is awesome.
Exactly. And one of the worst things a company can do is attach a number to their drivers, where all of a sudden they're not a name, they're not a person, they're not Terry from Toronto, they're just driver 1846. And
yeah,
what a horrible way to make someone feel marginalized by just associating a number with them.
Yeah. And that is, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I mean, that is some of the environmental consequences of being a fleet of 10,000 trucks. It's hard. It's not impossible, but it becomes a lot harder than. Now, I'm not sure, but I'm suspecting Wellington might be a little bit bigger than Jade in terms of number of fleets, but how many trucks do you have on the road, Michael?
We've got, I'll say 50 trucks based in Canada and similar in the United States.
And Larry, how big is your fleet?
About 85 trucks.
Okay, so you guys are very similar in size. So small to medium sized fleet, where, that is still environmentally, that becomes a little bit easier to do. When you get larger, it becomes harder to do. And we'll talk about that. So that's cool. Mike Millian, what do you think? If you're up and coming, you were a driver. So for those of you that don't know Mike's background, he's lived the life. And he has said in a previous podcast that when he retires from president of PMTC, he's not going to a beach in Mexico, or at least not with an airplane.
Well, I might for some of the year, not the whole year. I might for some of the year.
You're going to drive a truck down to Mexico and then just deliver.
No, I'm not. Definitely not. Anyway, yeah. I started out as a driver at 18 years old, and then 32 years in the industry. And the first 7 were as a driver, hauling livestock for the first 3 years in agriculture products, and then went into long haul for 4 years, coast to coast, Canada and the U.S. But Mike touched on a lot about how does a driver create value to us. It doesn't matter if you're a driver or a mechanic or being hired as a greeter at Walmart or working at your local Tim Hortons. I think what the key is, as Mike said, you have to be a good person. Yeah. You have to be eager. You have to be willing. And I think the key thing with anybody I deal with is you have to be honest. I don't care if I agree with you or not. Yeah. It's if you put the opinion across intelligently, say what you feel and believe, and be honest about it. Yeah. That's how you create value, whether you're a driver or any other position. Because the minute you're not honest, you've lost me. Yeah. And I have to say, I trust everybody until you give me a reason not to. And once you give me a reason not to trust you, it's going to take you a long time to get that trust back, right? Yeah. Because now I don't know if I can trust.
Yeah.
So I think you just have to be honest in that eagerness and willingness to learn. And you can have a person who might have great talents or skills to be a driver, but if their attitude is aggressive and forthright and combative, in a lot of cases, they're going to carry that onto the road. They're going to drive the vehicle the same way. They're going to be the road ragers you see out on the road, right? So it's all about personality and willingness to learn. If somebody has the right attitude, you can pretty much teach them to drive if they have the right attitude, and teach them and train them those skills. the attitude you can't really train. Either they have the correct attitude or not. And as you mentioned it, they're your brand. Well, for our association, we represent, 90% of our membership is private fleets. Roughly 10% is for hire fleets. But if you think of a private fleet, somebody whose main business is something other than trucking, they're out there with a uniform, Home Hardware, Coca-Cola, Molson Coors, Tim Hortons, whatever it is, they're really representing the brand. And if they cut somebody off in traffic and are being aggressive, they don't think of the driver. They think of, well, that was Home Hardware that just went by me, or that was Coke that just went by me, or that was Walmart that just went by me. Yes. It may affect people's buying habits of whether they go into your store or not. And it's not just the way they drive their truck. They're in a restaurant or a service center or whatever else, and they're being, lack of a better term, they're being an idiot. They're being rude to people. They're being aggressive.
Yeah.
They see that uniform. They're not going to remember the driver's name. They're going to remember who they work for.
Yeah.
So it's the attitude that is created. And, that goes both ways. If you treat your drivers with respect, they'll hopefully treat you with respect back. It's a two-way street, as they say, with respect, right? It has to go both ways.
Definitely. And so the common theme that if you have the attitude, I just did a recruiting video for an industrial services company in Edmonton, and they do scaffolding for industrial applications, oil fields and otherwise. And that was the message as I interviewed their people, ground level and presidents and vice presidents, and put together this video. It was like, if you have the attitude, we have a future for you, and we'll give you the aptitudes and we'll provide you with the learning. And so what a great time to be young. When I graduated out of university, the economy wasn't good. and what a great time to be coming into, because the opportunity is there if the attitude is there. Larry, any comments on this one?
Certainly. I would say on the hiring part, I'd like to check, you can't just hire just based on attitude. There's more. You look for, is this person someone of integrity, or do they apply themselves? What are their references? And, we've hired many of our, I always like this when the employees want their kids to start working there. It tells me something that they feel that it's a safe place, and that their kids aren't going to be corrupted or taken advantage of or beaten up in some way. And, I'm sure there's lots of places that will do that, but we've actually had employees' kids. We've got grandkids of former employees that have gone up through the ranks. Most of them started in the wash bay, or they started the very fundamentals, like get down to the nitty gritty. Kids 15, 16 years old that, hey, I'm ready to do something, Dad. Yes. Well, you go and ask the shop manager, and he'll determine if he needs somebody. And then maybe they start them 1 or 2 nights a week after school if it doesn't interfere, or the odd Saturday. And then you find out if they have aptitude. And if they have aptitude and a willing attitude, then you can train for skill. And so we've seen guys come and become mechanics, and some have moved on into the office and become front office material, even some of them. So yeah. I find that kind of rewarding in itself.
I loved just that comment, because when I worked at Shell for 15 years, I still remember the one plaque on the wall. It was the best predictor of someone's future is their previous footsteps. And so Shell was really good at saying, okay, you might have a degree, for example, and it might be in a certain field. But while that tells us you can think, we're going to watch for your authenticity. And if your authenticity says that you really belong somewhere else in a different sort of field, we have no issues taking you there. So watching people's footsteps and rewarding them for that is cool. Which brings us to question number 2, and I'll go back to Michael Zellick. So how, I think it's something you're strong at. Share, what's the secret sauce to making drivers feel valued? The retention portion.
Yeah, to make drivers feel valued, I mean, there's obviously many contributing factors. I'd say the big one, again, respect is about as simple as it gets. Respect the drivers when they come to you with issues. You've got to be the person that looks after them, whether or not you can, perhaps correct the issue that's not always possible, but look into it, let them know that you looked into it, and then follow up with your next steps. The other thing is, you got to treat them like you treat any other staff member at your company. There's at many companies, there's a big divide between truck drivers and office staff. And there's a lot of people with the mentality that they're just a truck driver. And that's the worst mentality that you can have. Just like anyone in the office, you know, the driver should have a fair and consistent wage. And there's different ways of doing that. I think pay by the mile is getting a little outdated, but there's got to be some way that you guarantee these drivers regular pay. You take the onus off of them when it's not their fault if they're stuck in construction or bad weather, or if there's no backhaul for them. Right now, in most companies, it's the driver that takes the biggest hit to their paycheck when there are these delays, where the company, they're minimally infected. So the consistency there is big. And again, by listening to them, you can adjust to what their needs and wants are. Maybe they'll have a really good idea on, you know, what type of truck you need to haul certain freight if they're on a consistent load. And, you know, on paper, it might make sense to have one type of engine, and then the driver through, you know, hundreds of thousands of miles can say, hey, you know, that's not going to be enough power. Yeah. And again, their vantage point from behind the wheel is so much more in tune than, you know, what some spreadsheet can tell you. So you definitely want to listen to them. You definitely want to offer them consistent pay, and you want to share feedback with them. It's so easy to share the negative feedback. You turn on the news, it's a lot of negative stuff. You know, reach out to your drivers on a regular basis. Let them know that you appreciate them. Recognize their efforts. Don't wait for 1 week a year in September to highlight them. Highlight them often. You know, shout it from the rooftops. You've got some of the best drivers. You want to let the world know that, and definitely let the driver know that, because it's something that it's a big point of pride for a lot of drivers.
You're actually giving some relationship advice as well. So don't wait for Valentine's Day to let your wife know that's that you love her, and sprinkle it out through the year, and away you go. Now you're mentioning the type of truck and the type of engine. Now I'll skip to Larry just because of that segue. But I mean, Larry, one of the ways that I see you actively, and I think it's intentional, the way that you show a driver he's valued is by the quality and the beauty of the truck he gets to drive.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge deal for me, because, you know, I've driven so much of my life myself. You know, I say to guys, you're going to spend approximately 2/3 of your life in this truck. Life's too short to drive something that you don't like. So giving them some autonomy in that area, you talk about autonomous trucks, but giving the person some autonomy that he can have some influence, you know. So sometimes it's asking them as simple as what type of stacks do you like on your truck? Like, I've actually just got 3 new Kenworths that have come in, and, you know, the guys that I've got lined up for them don't know this, but I know them. Yeah. And it's much easier for me to spec equipment when I know the guy. So when you've got drivers that have been with you for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, if you don't know what they want, it's like back to relationship, like with your wife. If you don't know what her favorite color is, or what her favorite food is, or things like that, like, come on, you're not paying attention. And
so Larry, what is Kim's favorite color? Kim is Larry's wife.
Well, actually, to be honest, she would be the first to tell you that she's not really particular, but she likes all colors. You know quite well that I really like green and orange.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. Mike, what are your contributions on this topic?
Well, you know, showing value, I think you mentioned in the introduction, you know, is it paid? Pay is only a part of it. I mean, I don't think it's the amount of pay. It's, Mike touched on it. It's the consistency of pay. If you're trying to run a budget, you know, making $300 one week and $1,500 next week is a little hard to run a budget on if you're living paycheck to paycheck. So that consistency of pay is important. But no matter how much you pay a driver or don't pay them, if you do not respect them and show them value, they're going elsewhere, because they're not going to be happy. You know, paycheck's a paycheck. But if you treat them like a piece of garbage, they're not going to stay with you. So it's all about that mutual respect, getting to know them. You know, you touched on it a bit earlier. As the fleet gets bigger, you assign numbers and it gets more difficult to know the person. I really don't think it is. all it takes is a second to say what their name is.
Yeah.
Right. Like I can give you 2 examples of a fleet that I used to drive when I was very early in my career. I was 21, 22 years old. 1 positive, 1 negative. The general manager, who was twice my age, probably more than twice my age, company was about 60 trucks then. Introduced me when I started there, introduced himself to me and told me that there was an open door policy and I could come in, talk to him whenever I wanted. Yeah. A lot of people say that, but they mean it. And anybody who knows me, this isn't something that's just developed since I've got this job. Yeah. I'm very outspoken. I have a lot of opinions, and I'm not afraid to share those opinions. So I went into his office on numerous occasions with a thought I had about something that was being done right or wrong. He could have looked and said, what does this 21-year-old snot-nosed kid know that's been around for 3 years? Never did that once. He said it was an open door policy. Always invited me to sit down and we shot the breeze. Sometimes he agreed with me, sometimes he didn't. But when the conversation was over, he always reached over and shook my hand and thanked me for coming in and giving my opinion. And he would tell me, good idea, or he would tell me, well, thanks, but we're not going that way right now. Yeah. I appreciated that the person listened. That's all a driver wants in a lot of occasions. Not that you're just sitting there looking at them talking, that you're actually listening to what they're saying and providing feedback. So that is huge. Whether you agree with the driver or not, just knowing that you value their input is important. Yeah. I think it's one of the most important things you can do for a driver. You know, Larry touching on the truck, most truck drivers are extremely proud of the truck, whether they're company drivers or owner-operators. So yeah, anything you can do to personalize that for them, that's going to go a long way. You know, me, it wasn't so much the outside, but I'm a clean freak. And when I first started driving, I remember bringing my first truck home that had a bunk on it that I was going across the border with. Just to give you an example of what drivers think of the trucks. My sister comes out, who was older than me, and sits in the seat, and then she flips around and puts her shoes right in the middle of the carpet between my seats. And like I said, I kept it spotless. And I looked at her and I said, get your shoes off my carpet. And she goes, well, it's just a truck. What's it matter? And I said, I spend 12 days out of 14 in here. This is my house. Can I come through your house and walk through it with my shoes on? Yeah. Oh, I didn't think of it that way. Right? But that's how a driver thinks of their truck, right? Like they're there more than they are anywhere else. So any way you can show them pride in that vehicle, if you give most of them, if you give them a vehicle that they show pride in, they'll look after it.
Yeah. I love what you just said, and it brings me to a point that I'll get your thoughts on. But in our country today, not even just in transport, but we talk about, and it's at the heart of what I do. I believe that various members of our government, I believe the public, and this is not about hate, this is not about any ill intent, but I think Canadians, both government and otherwise, really don't know what trucking is like. And there's an unconscious bias. So that statement where like, what does it matter? And you can understand it. Like in their car, maybe there's, their kids and there's popcorn and there's whatever. And like, so what does it matter? And it's, I'm not vilifying the person, but, and so a couple of things. Number one, I want to get your thoughts. And number two, just to say that over the next little while, and Larry, I might be doing it with one of your drivers and coming to you as well, but I've already got 2 trips lined up where I'm going to be going out, one to the ice roads up Alaska Highway, and just creating some documentaries on Canada. This is what a driver goes through. They're great people. You need to know them more. When we don't know, that's when politicians can play a dangerous game. But when you know someone, there's so many benefits to it. So on the area of unconscious bias, Canadians and Americans, probably, it might be a global phenomenon. Do you believe that, there's danger in that they really don't know what it's like to be in the industry?
But you want me on this one first, Dave?
Either one of any one of you, go for it.
Okay. Somebody who's been in the industry 32 years, that bias has been there from the get-go. We have an image problem in this industry, always have. Yep. Some of it from our own making, some of it not from our own making. Yeah. But some of it is definitely from our own making, and the fact that we don't talk about our industry enough and what we do and what our drivers do and what the the industry does for everybody's everyday lives. I think when COVID first hit, it was the most positive this industry had been looked at. I wouldn't say when it first hit, but about a month after.
Yeah.
Because when it first hit, drivers were actually treated even worse because everybody was scared of the virus, and bathrooms have always been an issue. And when COVID first hit, a driver couldn't even find anywhere to go to the bathroom because everything was closed down.
Yeah.
But shortly after that, governments got involved, made sure people opened up, and truck drivers were declared essential. And the media and everybody got on the Thank a Trucker campaigns, and everybody, for the first time, I think, in my lifetime, en masse, understood the vital importance the trucking industry plays in our everyday lives in our economy.
Yeah.
So we had a brief period, I'd say, where the whole media and people looked at us and said, wow, I'm sitting at home doing nothing. These people are still working, and I would be sitting at home without any toilet paper if it wasn't for them going back and forth, because apparently everybody needed toilet paper then for some reason. But, but I think the bias is, and Mike touched on it earlier though, truck drivers are thought of, you can't drive a truck. You can't do anything else, drive a truck. And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah.
Anybody who needs to get up on a truck and look at it now, it's more like the cockpit of an airplane than it is anything else. It takes a great amount of skill to do what they do, forwards and backwards. Try to back one of them things up into a tight loading dock and tell me that anybody can do it, because they can't. It's a very tough job. It's a hard job, and we should respect the men and women in this industry that are part of it. And like I said, part of that is our fault as an industry, because we don't tell people the opportunities that are out there. You can, Larry owns a company, or how many company owners out there started out truck? So driving is a great career. And if you want to drive truck for the rest of your life, you can make a good living at it. You can stay there all the way through.
Yeah.
But if there's other things you want to do, but there's so many different paths in this industry. Like I was a driver, then I was a trainer, then I was a fleet manager. Now I'm running an association. Like, I didn't think that path was there for me 32 years ago. They opened up.
Yeah.
Right. There's IT, there's claims. Like, we haven't done a good job of letting people know that driving is a great profession. And then if you want to branch out, there's so many opportunities out there for you. And it's not just a job anybody can do. But there's lots of opportunity, and we really should get the message out there.
Yeah, and I'm a big advocate that influence starts in the schools. I mean, political organizations realize this, and I think companies need to realize this, and industries need to realize that it starts in the schools. If kids can't see it, and they don't see it, then it's hard for them to achieve it or even consider it. And it's at the core. It's an investment up front. But you need to do that. So just a couple things. Mike Zelik, I'm going to be shooting a wedding in Barrie on June the 4th. And so I'm going to be down in Ontario for probably, hopefully, a week or a week and a half beforehand. I need to head back to shoot a wedding out here in Calgary for the 10th. So we'll be driving back out, bring my wife. But I might be knocking on your door and saying, can I hop a ride with your driver and make a Wellington driver part of this documentary that I'm going to create. And that'll be great. And so something for you to consider. We can chat afterwards. But Mike, I love your points. That attitude of I can't do anything else. Some people think it. Some drivers actually believe it. Some great drivers, they're great people, but they've said it to me. Dave, I did this because I really couldn't do anything else. And that's selling yourself short. So, but I don't think the industry trends necessarily, the danger is they aren't helping to help correct this attitude. So I want to move to our final sort of segue or topic, and that is the way we value drivers changing. And I want to talk about a couple of things. Number one, I want to talk about technology. So, I've never driven truck, and 10 years ago, I probably couldn't even get the truck out of the driveway, given all the things that were involved in driving a truck. Technology today, it's automatic. I can hop in a truck, and even if I didn't have a license, risking a huge fine and imprisonment, I might be able to get it down the street for you because I put it into drive and I go down that pathway, and I realize there's a lot more to it. But from a perception point of view, technology has both made driving safer, which is a good thing, and in the perception of many in the public, maybe easier. And so does that affect value? And then the second thing I want to talk about when we talk about change, I'm going to relate it being a Calgary. Well, I'm not a Calgary boy. I'm a Port Colborne, Ontario boy, but I've been in Calgary for 30 years. Is this example? And the question is going to be this: do some business models in transport today? Are they actually driving? And in my mind, is a negative change around the value of drivers. And so I'll give you the one parallel, and then I'll get your thoughts. In Alberta, we have obviously oil sands. And in tar sands, it was the campaign from a number of organizations that took our industry, which is one of the truth is one of the most clean and efficient, respectful ways of doing something that is not environmentally friendly, no, but we do it as good as anyone in the world. And yet here were a number of organizations successfully even convincing some Canadians that they shouldn't use their own oil and gas. In the midst of that, because you want to understand people's behavior, I was expecting people to fight back. And the truth is that the oil companies, while they certainly have the pockets to do it and mount a counter social media campaign and a counter campaign, they were more or less silent. And so my question, actually to Stephen Harper, there was a fireside greeting chat that we had. Our former prime minister was there. And I said, Steve, would it be true to say that, the oil companies aren't all that unhappy about this happening? Because what it does is it prevents other channels from opening up that they would have to manage and represent an extra cost to their business. Their current setup of getting a 20% discount on Canadian crude, sending it down to Houston refineries where they're born for that crude, and then cheaply export it by ship and efficiently export it from there. That's their best business model. And so that balance between your shareholders and your people, and companies don't fly flags. They're not Canadian or American anymore. They're global. And I said, is it true that they don't want what Canadians or Albertans and Saskatchewans and people across Canada are looking for in terms of expanded capability of exporting through our West Coast? Bring this to trucking. Right now we're going to lose a lot of drivers because of the mandates, a lot of negative things that are going on. Supply chain is tight. But are there business models in transport, given the change in the industry, that actually might be okay with it? They're not going to stand up in front of the media and cheer, but it's kind of a reset. Rates go up. There's this promise of autonomous trucking. So that's a big intro. Do with it what you want. Let's start with Michael Zellick. Go for it. Are the way we value truckers, is it changing? And how do the business models in trucking influence that?
Yeah, I do think the way we value drivers is changing, and you're going to notice that where, with the mandate being in effect now for several weeks, the impact it's going to have on the shelves in grocery stores is going to be noticed. The extra cost it's going to be to move freight is going to be reflected in the price of various goods. Like, I think someone showed me that the price of butter had gone up by $2.50 from whatever it was, and I'd assume a good portion of that has to do with the cost of transporting goods. Some companies, I hope they don't take advantage of it, but with the influx of Canada-only drivers, I hope that doesn't drive that rate down, because that's the opposite of what we want to happen. I have seen a lot of companies raising their rates, certainly for cross-border drivers, because there's such an extra premium on them right now, and probably for as long as at least the mandate's there, and some people just don't want to go to the States anymore.
Yeah.
Two quick things I wanted to touch on from previous conversations. We were talking about the pride of ownership when it comes to trucks. If you look at a driver on social media, I don't know what the percentage would be. I'd say about 75% of them are going to have a truck in their photo somewhere.
Yep.
And that just shows that, they've got diesel in the blood. They're kind of a trucker at heart, and they're proud to show that. As for the getting more people into trucking, I bring up the example at my nephew's, I don't know, junior kindergarten graduation. Everyone was holding up a little sign of what they want to be when they're older. And my nephew was a police officer. There's a ballerina. There's an astronaut. And there's one kid that had a sign that said truck driver. And I wonder if people are going to discourage him from that. I wonder if his guidance counselor or his family or whomever are going to say, oh, no, why don't you try something different? Or maybe they'll be encouraged and say, hey, you know what, you're going to become a driver, and maybe you drive a company truck your whole life and you love it. Maybe you get into oversize, maybe you become an owner operator, maybe you get into safety or training, or, follow someone else's footsteps and become an owner of a company. I'm not confident that's the encouragement that they would get. And it's too bad, because you do want to see more hands-on people, kids that love playing with trucks growing up, following their passion. And I feel like they're getting talked out of it.
Yeah, well, definitely. I don't disagree. Larry, what are you seeing?
Well, I think that, I've got 12 grandchildren. I'm kind of excited about them, at least one or two of them, hopefully engaging the process, that they are enjoying either watching both my sons work here and our partners in the company now as well. And they obviously liked it. And I think there's tremendous opportunities within the industry as a whole. So on every level, you can talk about automating everything, and the trucks get more complex, and sometimes our expectation of the drivers may be reduced. The truck is supposed to produce all these efficiencies. And yet, even within that, because I've got a number of those trucks that are quite automated and have all the latest technology, and I continue to order trucks, some of them that way. But there's your traditional guy that says, an 18 speed is where it's at, and I love that, and it gives me a better sense of control.
Yep. And,
pulling the tanker liquids with no baffles in the tank and lots of times downloaded, even again amps up the skill set. So are we going to continually lower the bar by making it too easy or too accessible for everyone? Or do you raise the bar and say, you know what, this generation is as capable of learning as the last one?
Yeah.
And I'd rather invest the time and encourage people. And, I'm excited about some of the new people that are coming into the industry. And, Jonathan told me this morning how good one of these new guys in problem solving, things that, I think we need to ask the right questions and then give those people enough autonomy to actually do what they need to do.
Yeah.
And we'll all be encouraged and pleased to see that it's not all over. The industry's not over. And even if the truck at some point is doing everything, technology has a way of breaking down. And
never.
we just maybe need to get smarter continually, training, new types of people. And you can't solve everything on the computer. Sometimes you just have to get your hands dirty.
Yeah. So Mike Millian, thank you, Larry. Is the industry getting more depersonalized in general, even though there's pockets of, like the gentlemen that are speaking with us, Mike and Larry?
I think society is getting more depersonal. We spend too much time on talking to each other via social media instead of in person. And COVID hasn't made it any better, where we talk to everybody through Zoom instead of actually meeting them face to face. So, that's kind of society as a general. But, a couple things I want to touch on. You mentioned the autonomous truck. I absolutely 100% hate that term. Autonomous truck is not a term I believe we should use. It lets people think we need drivers. We have a driver shortage. Yet we have some segments, mainly media, not you, but mainstream media. Got autonomous trucks to be driving themselves in 5 or 10 years. How in the hell am I supposed to recruit a driver if I'm telling them he or she's not going to have a job in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah.
And let's be completely honest. I believe what we should be calling them is driver assisted vehicles, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
Planes can mainly land themselves and take off by themselves without any interaction. They got 2 pilots in, right? And if there was 0 pilots on it, I'm not getting on the plane. because as you mentioned, sensors fail. And if the sensor fails, I'd like to know that I'm not just dead, because there's nobody there to take over for the failed sensor. And if you have a truck going up the road, no matter how good the technology is, sensors fail. And if there's nobody in there to drive that vehicle, you got a runaway truck.
Yeah.
So are we going to see out in the open highway trucks piloting themselves when no drivers are needed in the next 5 or 10 years? I don't believe so. And young people are interested in technology. You got to start promoting this more, right? Look at the technology we can have in these vehicles. It's same technology you have in cars and planes. You're still going to have a job out there. You're just going to do it differently. Yeah. And in my opinion, the safest driver out there is going to be when you have the safest truck coupled with the safest driver, and the driver's trained to properly work with that vehicle, and they both work together. Yeah. Because the problem is, if you have an automatic transmission and you throw somebody in there and say, you know, your example, you can get it down the road, you'll be all right. Yeah. But you still don't know how to handle it. Yeah. What happens when it gets into neutral? What happens when you go around a corner too quick? Like, you don't know how to control the vehicle, and you are going to run into issues. Yeah. And as an industry, we still have a problem with that. Somebody drove a standard for 20 years, and then we upgrade them to an automatic. And some companies won't train them. You have to train them on the idiosyncrasies of the new vehicle. Just because it may be easier to drive, it's only easier to drive and fully safe for you to drive if you know how to properly drive it. Yeah. What do I do when it slips into neutral? What do I do when this happens and that happens? So there's always going to be a place, but we have to use this technology as a way to get young people excited to come into our industry, because young people want to work with technology. Yeah. There's always going to be a place for the ones that still want to shift gears. If I was out driving tomorrow, I'd want a gear shift. Yeah. But my wife, who's just maybe going to start out in a couple of years, she wants an automatic. So, you know, there's going to be options out there for both. Yeah. But we still have to work with it and promote it. And to the points of getting into the schools, and David, I think we've talked about this before, but to me, that's a whole societal issue that is changing a little bit. But try to get into a school. Try to get into a guidance counselor and tell them you want to talk about the trucking industry. It's starting to change a little bit, but it's pretty tough. The doors are slammed in your face in a lot of cases. Like I said, it's changing a lot in the last couple of years. And a lot of that's because of parents and guidance counselors in our society too. We've spent so many years telling our kids, well, you're not going to university? What are you, stupid? Like that's the impression we give. And it's completely 100% wrong. You can make so much money in the trades, being an electrician, a truck driver, a welder, a mechanic, all these different trades. And we push, it's not just trucking we're pushing people away from, we're pushing them away from trades. You can make good money in a shorter period of time and not leave school with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, right? Yeah. You can get a job quicker and make 80, 90, 100, 120 grand. And we need to understand not everybody wants to sit in the classroom. Yeah. Not everybody wants to work with their hands. Not everybody's fit to be in an office. We have to make sure that we make them both feel valued and don't make people feel shame for not taking the path that we as society think they should be taking. Yeah. And the best way to look at it, you can have all the Einsteins in the world building all the drafts you want for every building you want to build. If somebody doesn't go out there and actually build the damn thing, your drafts aren't any good. Somebody still has to be able to take this and put it into that. We need both. And we need to quit funneling people into, if you don't go here, you're not being valued. It's, as you can see, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. It's not just the trucking industry, but it's... How
dare you, Mike Millian, turn a problem into an opportunity? So that's, I love the perspective, because here's the scoop. It goes to recruiting and retention. I think we do need to be honest with the next generation about what they can expect. Because otherwise you can put on the traditional, you can put on a really good roadshow and invite some people into the industry. But if what they encounter is not what they were promised, then your retention sucks. You might have good recruiting numbers, but you're always doing the circle and it's going round and round and round. And so I like that. I think that's awesome. I think.
Well, if I had to guess, I know Mike better than Larry, but I know Mike's turnover numbers are phenomenal. If I had to guess, I'd guess Larry's are pretty low as well. There's companies out there that do exactly what you're talking. They're honest with their drivers. They tell them out front what the job's going to be. And as a result, the turnover rate's pretty low and pretty managed.
Yeah.
We also have companies out there that lie to get somebody in the door. And 3 weeks later, the driver's leaving the door because it's not what they were promised. Like there's no point in promising somebody something that they're not going to get because they're just going to leave. Right.
What's cool about your saying is what we can say is that, you know what, the value of a driver is not diminishing, it's just changing. And in fact, it might get greater. And if you attach it to technology, and that's what connects trucking with kids, then what an opportunity. What an opportunity. I like that. Okay, last question. I want to respect your time. Is that what is the opportunity in an industry where perhaps, you know, and I like your comment too, Mike, it's the entire world, it's getting more depersonalized. What is the opportunity for trucking companies that do still make people matter? And you know, niche markets, I'm thinking of, you know, the Blockbuster out in Oregon. Well, you know, all the Blockbusters are gone, and using the metaphor maybe of all the companies that don't make people numbers are gone, but there's one left in Oregon, and he's a billionaire because that niche market is wildly successful. It's the only place you can go and get it. And so what's the opportunity for companies that treat people right? Anyway.
I'll let one of the other two go. I just went on a 5 or 10 minute diatribe. So
and it was awesome, Mike. It's going to be played again and again and again because I love what you just said.
Go ahead, Larry. I'll go second here.
Sure. One of the things that I do is I like to talk to all the new drivers. Before I'd like to know them. I'm entrusting them with a very nice truck and trailer quite often, and someone's product that is maybe worth a significant amount of money. And you expect the guy, you give him a destination, say, can you be in Houston, 2 days from now? And you expect that guy to take that thing, respect it, plan his route efficiently, and respect the public. So one thing that I encourage them is that, number one, they're not Earnhardt. You're not the intimidator. Mm-hmm. So I expect you to drive in such a way that you represent the brand. You know, in the old days, people would drive or ride for the ranch, and they would ride for the brand. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to respect our brand and think of it as your own. So that how would you like to be represented on the road? And I think that most of them buy in pretty good. And then I say that respect is earned from both sides. We need to earn your respect, and you need to earn ours. When we get to know each other, you don't know if the guy's a round peg or a square peg. So maybe he's an oval.
You just
peg.
know he lives in the peg. Sorry, that was bad. Larry's in Winnipeg, so.
Okay, yeah. So, and I think that we've had pretty good buy-in. You know, it used to be that people use that expression, ignorance is bliss, and you can just sort of fake it till you make it. Nowadays, not quite so much. We need to train for the job that has to be done because there's so many factors at stake. On the other hand, I think that there's a certain thing that people need to have is they have to have courage to go out there and face it. So there's a lot of challenges out there, and people aren't necessarily kind. The world is a difficult place, but normally I've been able to, in my experiences myself, I've been driving since 1975. I've met a lot of people. I've been to the top of Alaska and every state in the Union and across Canada. The only place I haven't gone yet is Newfoundland, and I'm hoping to go there this summer. But, there's people, if you show yourself friendly and respectful and treat people kindly, you usually get that back.
Yeah, I like it. Mike Zeller.
Yeah, to your point, a lot of the companies that are struggling with driver retention and struggling to get with the times, it's because they've been doing things the same way they've always been doing things. And, you'll bring forth a new idea and they'll say, well, no, it's always been done this way. And, that's why they're running into the same problems is because they're not adapting. It's it's a different market there where you have to cater to the driver and you have to find driver friendly runs. And I think, David, you mentioned it, where you've got to get more specific. I compare a lot of stuff to an office environment. If I'm hiring for an accountant or someone for accounts payable, let's say, I'll put that in the job description. I won't just say I'm looking for an office worker, where I still see a lot of jobs out there that are just looking for a truck driver.
Yeah.
There are thousands of types of truck drivers. I mean, I like to break it down to about 5 different types specifically, but you can go on and on about how many different types of drivers there really are. So if you're looking for a local driver, advertise for a local driver. It's fishing with a spear instead of fishing with a net. And maybe you get less candidates, but the ones that you get are quality. And those are the ones that are going to stick with the company. And then when you have to make future hires, you've already got a pool to choose from of strong candidates. So to me, it's fairly common sense, but I still see it done the other way so many times that it boggles my mind.
Well, and like my experience in teaching leadership is that, so many people will look at, for example, what you do, Mike, at Wellington, and they'll want to do it. Genuinely, they'll want to do it. But the emotional urgencies in their life, the pressures of the current environment, the urgencies that has created because they're not treating people well, take up all their time. And they're going, how do I find the time to do what I kind of in my heart know, and I see companies like Jade and Wellington doing? How do I find the time to actually do that? And so if you're listening and you're in that spot, for me, the encouragement is you need to know it's an investment. And I think it has to be a choice at some point. You just have to say, I'm going to focus on the people portion, and it'll start to pay back. People over profits, and then profits tend to grow is the truth, but it takes an original choice up front. And so I like that. I will ask one more quick question while I have it on the call, because it just it just came to me, and that is around this consolidation in the industry. We're getting the mega companies that just seem to be getting bigger every single day, and environments are important. And I'm going to give you an example of a friend. It's not in trucking. Again, I'm going to draw the parallel, but a friend of mine, Ryan Gill, he runs a company called Communo, and it's in the digital marketing space. And so he has offices. It started in Calgary. It's now in Vancouver, Seattle, New York, Toronto. He has offices all around North America. And what it does is it lets individual entrepreneurs rent office space in the same building. And then as they develop a relationship, they collaborate together on pieces of business that they could have never quoted for before. And so they're not the same company, but you create a community whereby they can leverage each other's strengths. And for a lot of bigger companies, it's actually nice because they don't have the full-time cost of someone, and this becomes a really reliable and cost-effective way of getting a lot of their stuff done. My question for all of you gentlemen, and again, whoever wants to respond, is do you see that in the trucking industry today, where there's an opportunity for the small to medium-sized firms not to necessarily have to come under one umbrella officially on a piece of ownership paper, but still collaborate to become, in essence, have a power that's much bigger than any one of those companies on its own? And what do you think of that opportunity in terms of fighting back against the mega fleets and competing in the world of mega fleets?
I think there's always going to be a place for your smaller fleets. It's still the majority of our industry, right? Like, it may not be the majority of the trucks, but 90% of this industry is still fleets that are under 10 trucks. So it's still majority of the fleet ownership. And a lot of people want to be part of a smaller organization where it's more personal, where they know them, where they may not make quite as much maybe, or in some cases they'll make a lot more. So, I mean, depends on the niche that you're in, but they know the owner, the secretary, the person that does payroll, the accountant, like, everybody's going to know who they are. Yeah. And there's still going to be a place for that. Yeah. Where you don't get lost as truck number 76032. And I do have to say too, and I brought that up before, even if you're a big company, you can still say hello to a person and ask them what. I agree. Right. And one of the biggest I brought it up earlier and then I forgot to get back to it, but that same company where the general manager made me feel like my opinion was valued, It was a 60, 70 truck fleet.
Yep.
They had 4 dispatchers. There was one dispatcher, and I won't say their name. No personality skills whatsoever. You would call in, hey, such and such, Mike here, what's your truck number? Nope, no hi or anything. What's your truck? Well, flip that around. It should be done the other way.
Yeah.
Right? I call and say, hey, so-and-so, how's it going? The first response should be, who am I talking to? Mike. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Can you let me know what your truck number is?
Yeah.
There's an easy way you can turn that around. You may need the truck number, but the person has a name. So big or large, you still have to make sure you're still dealing with people, not a number. But,
yeah. No, I love it.
Giselle, I think there's always going to be, you know, the mega carriers and the small carriers, and there's pros and cons to each, where obviously the big ones are going to have buying power, and they're going to have a different playing field in some respects, where, you know, their fuel discount is going to be substantial. But then there's the smaller companies that don't have all that overhead. You know, they don't have a multi-million-dollar facility. They don't have whatever 200 or 1,000 people on payroll, and at any given time people are off on vacation or sick or whatever happens. So yeah, there's going to be a good mix. And what I'm not sure is if the smaller companies, you know, enjoy being small, or, you know, their kind of end goal is to get big enough to get purchased by someone. I mean, I guess everyone's going to be a little bit different in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of setting the market rate, it is good to have a little bit of that variety, where, you know, there's going to be some customers where, you know, it's going to be for the big dogs to fight over, and then there's going to be a lot of freight where it's for the little guys to go for.
Yeah. Okay. Larry?
Yeah, I would say yes, I like that very much, and collaborating together with other outfits. I think the important thing is that you know the people. So if the leaders or the owners or the people in charge of it are people of integrity, that there's trust there, that they're not going to mow your lawn, or that they trust you, that you're not going to. Mm-hmm. And when you build those relationships, that together everyone accomplishes more. So if we work together, we could take on some incredibly big jobs, and then you get a reputation, or gain the respect of the people that are needing it, and you can grow together, and you can all sort of, and you don't always have to take the lead. I think sometimes, you know, figure out who's better at what, and say, you know what, this is your job, your customer. We'll support you. We'll give you 4 trucks, or we'll give you 2 trucks, or whatever it happens to be that they need. And then at the end of the day, it's all high fives all the way around. Everyone gets paid, and we all go forward.
I like it. If it's between June and October, Larry, any one of your family members can mow my lawn if they feel like it. But I know what you meant. Steal your business, and that is good, gentlemen. I appreciate your expertise, is who you are as people, and I think it's been a valuable conversation just around, you know, how do you value drivers? How do drivers create values for themselves as they look to expand their career, and also some cool perspectives on, you know, yeah, the value of a driver may be increasing, but their role is changing. And just marketing for that and being honest about that, and how we approach the industry through schools and otherwise. So have yourself an awesome day. Appreciate it. And we'll talk again.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks, guys.
So addicted, yeah. revenge. Same Prime Minister 6 years later as he fans the flames of an unjustified national emergency. So, Mr. Speaker, when did the Prime Minister lose his way? When did it happen?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag. We will choose to stand with Canadians who deserve to be able to get to their jobs, who be able to get their lives back. These illegal protests need to stop, and they will, Mr. Speaker.
That is a clip from question period and argument period in our House of Commons between the Conservatives and the Prime Minister over the Emergency Measures Act that has been put in place with regards to the protests in Ottawa and giving the government and police various powers to take care of any of the blockades that remain across the country. It's getting heated. It's getting personal. And one of my biggest beefs is that in a lot of situations, things get personal when they don't need to. And sometimes it's by mistake, it's just human nature, and sometimes it's manipulation of others to try to get something that they want. But many times, what gets personal should have been recognized as environmental. What do I mean by that? There's three players in the game of how we act. There's ourselves, there's people around us, and then there's the environment that we are in. If the environment that we are in is toxic, good people do bad things. If the environment that we're in is full of trust and respect, it's amazing how it can take people that weren't doing the best of things and turn them around. How do we get here? How do we get to over 1,000 police in Ottawa? Having to try to remove hundreds, if not 1,000 plus protesters and big rigs from downtown Ottawa. It's still ongoing, even though it started this morning. How do we get here that Canadian bank accounts are being frozen because they were found out to have donated to a cause that in their minds was simply fighting for the right to choose? How do we get here that, pets are going to be put down? If the people that are arrested within 8 days can't pick up their pets, they're going to kill them. How did we get here? Well, I think it's because of the environment. And I kind of hinted at it in the intro, and I want to follow up in this conclusion. I want to talk about a few environments that I believe got us to this place. And then I want to end just with some encouragement as to what we can all do and the power that we all have as ordinary Canadians to come to a place where we use this period for all its crap to unleash a unity that we've never seen and to unleash our promise as a healing nation in the world. So here it goes. Environment number one that caused a lot of families to break up, a lot of friendships to break up, that caused environments, our Canadians pitted against each other, is that the current government made a means to public safety the only goal. I posted an article on LinkedIn and on Facebook and various channels about this. They made a means to the goal of public safety the only goal. When you hear arguments in public, or in the parliament and in public, Liberal ministers and the Prime Minister will say that vaccination is the only way out of this pandemic. And so the question becomes, are you vaccinated fully or not? And on that issue, Canadians will never fully agree. Americans would never fully agree. I don't think there's a country in the world that would fully agree. There are those people that truly believe in them. And then there are those that are among the unvaccinated and trucking who I've talked to who have questions. The name calling hasn't helped, calling them racist and misogynist and homophobes by the Prime Minister. but they just have genuine questions. They've seen injuries in their family and amongst their friends, and they're going, do I really want to take this? And for them, the question is about the right to choose. But I don't think we'd have to have that argument. I don't think we need to go there, because if it just stays at the question, are you fully vaccinated or not, we will never agree, and the division will continue to get wider and wider and wider and wider and wider. And as we'll talk to you about the political environment, sometimes that's intentional for political gain. But it's dangerous for national unity. You see, if vaccination is one means to public safety, then public safety and health should be the goal. I believe that's a goal that all Canadians, or at least 99.98% of Canadians, can agree on. And this whole thing started with cross-border truck drivers being mandated to be vaccinated as of January 15th, meaning that as of that date, 25,000, up to 25,000 families were affected not being able to cross the border anymore. For some, they did have Canadian roots, and they had companies, such as Larry mentioned in the previous interview. He's working with those drivers to keep them busy in Canada. But for some, it meant the loss of their job and the loss of their income, and for some, the loss of everything, depending on where their finances were. It became emotional. If the goal is, are they safe? I believe, as most Canadians would step back, not all. It depends what you're listening to these days. And I get it. But most Canadians could recognize that someone driving down the road in a metal cage, fully shut out from the world for 10 to 13 hours a day, is not a risk, a huge risk. Nobody's a zero risk, but it's not a huge risk to spreading COVID. So environment number one that got us here is that the government has made a means to the goal of public health and safety the only goal. And it creates an arena where we will disagree. But what I'm saying is there is another choice. Make the goal the real goal. And under that tent, there are a lot of areas where Canadians can come together and agree that they are respecting each other, agree that they're after the same things. It would unify more than it would divide. The second part of the environment that got us here is a lack of listening. The government is really good at saying that they consult industry on various choices that they make with regards to policy around industry, and it is true. In the fall of last year, they brought every single trucking association around the table, and they asked for the recommendations as they considered implementing mandates for cross-border drivers effective early in the new year. And the associations that were there, I think had from a source that was in the room, had a couple of people from each association. They went around the table and it was unanimous. Don't do it. And it had nothing to do with pro or anti-vaccine. Not that tent that's going to have everyone fighting each other. They quoted the supply chain saying, we're already 20,000 drivers short. Do we really want another 15 to 20,000 drivers off the road? They quoted just respect for people who were out on the road and committed to making sure that goods got delivered in the early stages of the pandemic when there were no vaccines and there was not a concrete knowledge of how fatal or deadly COVID was going to be. It's not a great way to say thank you. And number three, they quoted the environment that I just mentioned. Someone riding down a road 10 to 13 hours in a steel cage all by themselves or with the same person, if you're a team driver, is not a huge risk to spread COVID. And the government said no. Thanks, but no thanks. They got to say that they consulted the industry. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You see, as a speaker, here's how I relate that. is that for many of you, you know that I'm a leadership trainer. I go into companies and I train supervisors, managers on leading people. And my shtick is the power of an environment to influence behavior. And that can be used for good or for bad. And we're seeing both in today's environment. And at the end of each workshop, I would get evaluation sheets. And I contracted for a company for 13 years. And, most often at the end of the day, I would look at those evaluation sheets and I would also get verbal feedback from people saying, loved it, Dave. Thank you so much. High fives, hugs, tears every once in a while that were good tears as people realize solutions that unlock stuff. But every once in a while, I would get an evaluation that more or less said, Dave, why do you do what you do? You suck. Now, here's the scoop about feedback. It's, one piece of feedback does not truth make. So had the government gone around the table and they would have received from a couple of the associations a hesitancy to implement mandates, that would have been one thing. You see, at my workshop, if 95% of the people are happy and there are 2 people out of, there are 2 people out of 80 people that weren't that happy with the day, I'm going to try to understand where they're coming from to always get better, but I may not lock, stock, and barrel change what I'm doing because 95% of the people said they loved it. 100%. If 100% of the people in the room say, Dave, what are you doing? You suck. I better take a good long look in the mirror. And our government didn't do that. 100% of the association said, don't do it. And they continued in the stubbornness to make a means to the goal the only goal and create an arena where there is no solution. There is no way out. And so this created the next environment, which is where it got bigger than trucking. So here's the scoop. The drivers had talked to their MPs, had written to their MPs, they had their association. They went through the ring, they went through the ladder, the ring of the ladders to try to get what they wanted and what they needed. They took the initial steps and they were left all alone. And as the convoy, the Freedom Convoy 2022 started to roll from west to east and from east to center Canada, it got bigger than trucking. I think I mentioned in the last program that as I went out just west of Calgary at an overpass, it was quite the scene. These were not a fringe majority of racist, misogynists, and homophobes. These were every single day Canadians of all cultures, of all races, of all ages. They were generally enthusiastically embracing the truckers that were coming through in the convoy, because to them, they were their lions of justice, because they felt segregated. They felt pinned in a corner. They wanted hope in their situation. And it was quite emotional to be there and to witness that and to hear from my friend in Alberta that while I was at one overpass that had hundreds of people waving flags behind me and then tons of cars lined up on either side of the road, that he was driving from Edmonton to Calgary that night, and that every single overpass on Highway 2, the 200-kilometer stretch, was full of Canadians. Mr. Prime Minister, this is not a fringe minority. And you know what? It's awesome that it got bigger, but it also presents problems. Because the industry, in not being able to persuade the government, even though it tried, lost control of their group. And their de facto spokespeople and their de facto representatives became someone else. And some of them are really good people. and some of them with the memorandum of understanding that talked about the government stepping down and them forming a temporary government with, are not that sane. Give me a break. Can I make this point though? It's kind of like your cellular contract or the terms and conditions that you agree to when you create your Google account. I don't think that 95% of the truckers involved in this convoy and 95% of the people involved in this convoy would have actually read the memorandum of understanding that they signed. And you may, be shouting, well, that's stupid. How could you not? But let me ask you this question. How many of you know what's on page 2 of your cellular contract? I don't think most of us read it. They got caught up in emotion, and this thing just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And what it did is it made it impossible to come to a resolution. You see, if it was just the issue of removing mandates for cross-border drivers, there might have been a hope of a resolution, but now it became removing all mandates for everyone. And given the government's position, that just wasn't going to happen. It created a situation where there were unrealistic goals on both sides and no way out. When you don't control what you can control, or when you ignore things when they're small, they tend to get bigger and then you lose control. That's just a natural human principle. And I think that it happened here. I know that it happened here. And the fifth, our fourth environment, is unconscious bias. We all have it. I actually have a pet peeve that for the past 3 years that our government and our news outlets have reminded Canadians that they are systemically racist. Not that that isn't true, because it might be. But most people don't know the definition of systemic racism. It means that your environment gives you a bias that may not come from a hatred in your heart, but it gives you a bias towards other people. I much prefer the term unconscious bias, and we all have that. Not even out of personal choice, but the environments that we are brought up in and the exposure to events and things that happen, they form our mindset and our opinion of other people, places, and things. And sometimes we can be telling ourselves lies about other people. Unconscious bias has not helped in this situation. I remember watching a CTV interview of the Hotel Association president in Ottawa. And I'm not even, like I said, everyone has this. So this is not even a direct attack on the morning anchor. I'm not going to even mention her name because it changes on certain days. And that's not the point. I'm not attacking a person. But I just remember the association director talking about encounters between tourists in Ottawa and members of the protest group that were staying in hotels in Ottawa and meeting in the lobby. And you could see on her face, there was this cringe as she responded to how awful that must have been, that kind of said, I'm so sorry you had to meet those people there. So I asked our panel earlier on, is there unconscious bias in trucking? And there always is. And it doesn't come out of hate. Canadians don't hate truckers, more or less they think, but from a distance. And it doesn't help. Lack of knowledge is at the root of unconscious bias. And I think it's a big reason the Prime Minister ran when he saw the protests coming. He ran. He ran out of town. He hid. because the big rigs and the people who may not dress like him or act like him scared him. The truth of the situation is this would be some of the most peaceful protesters that are on the face of the earth. They're truly Canadian, eh? But his perception of people he didn't understand had him run. And it didn't help the situation. He didn't deal with it early on. It was left to fester. Unconscious bias and a lack of listening replaced by an eagerness to find out and actually conversation could have prevented a lot of what's happened. But the fifth part of the environment is the political environment, and all parties are guilty. They're playing this for votes. The Prime Minister and the Liberals are playing it for votes. The Conservatives are playing it for votes. The NDPs are playing it for votes. Because if you can get people emotional, that's when they tend to choose. That's when they tend to move. That's when they tend to change. Inject fear, inject uncertainty, inject all of those things, and you will get people to change. And it's your opportunity to manipulate to your point of view or to drive them to the choices that you want them to make. And it has to stop. And so those are just a few of the environments that I believe that got us to this place. And as I was having a friend over for dinner tonight, I was kind of saying, you know what, it just reminds me of a lot of wars. In that, you know what, people are pawns for games that are being played with people with more power and different objectives. It reminds me of, you know, people being on a battlefield that really didn't want to be there, but they had a role to play because they were in the army and the government declared war on a different country. It reminded me of my dad's recollection of being in a Russian prison camp for 4 years. And I admire him so much because he says, I've never hated them. He said, I recognize if the times were different and the circumstances were different, we could actually be really good friends. Sometimes environments pit us in roles against our will for someone else's power grab. And so as I was speaking that, my friend just kind of laughed. And she said that it reminded her of the story in 1914. Maybe some of you have heard it. It's called The Christmas Miracle. On Christmas Eve, 1914, in the dank, muddy trenches on the Western Front of the First World War, a remarkable thing happened. It came to be called the Christmas Truce, and it remains one of the most storied and strangest moments of the Great War, or of any war in history. British machine gunner Bruce Bairnsfather, later a prominent cartoonist, wrote about it in his memoirs. Like most of his fellow infantrymen of the 1st Battalion, he was spending the holiday eve shivering in the muck, trying to keep warm. He had spent a good part of the past few months fighting the Germans, and now in a part of Belgium called Bois de Ploegstaert, he was crouched in a trench that stretched just 3 feet deep by 3 feet wide. His days and nights marked by an endless cycle of sleeplessness and fear, stale biscuits and cigarettes too wet to light. Here I was in this horrible clay cavity, Bairnsfather wrote, miles and miles from home, cold, wet, through and covered with mud. There didn't seem the slightest chance of leaving except in an ambulance. Singing breaks out in the trenches on Christmas Eve at about 10 p.m. Bairnsfather noticed a noise. I listened, he recalled. Away across the field, among the dark shadows beyond, I could hear the murmur of voices. He turned to a fellow soldier in his trench and said, do you hear the Germans kicking up that racket over there? Yes, came the reply. They've been at it for some time. The Germans were singing carols. as it was Christmas Eve. In the darkness, some of the British soldiers began to sing back. Suddenly, Barnes' father recalled, we heard a confused shouting from the other side. We all stopped to listen, then the shout came again. The voice was from an enemy soldier speaking in English with a strong German accent. He was saying, come over here. One of the British sergeants answered, you come halfway, I come halfway. Man, do we need that right now? What happened next would, in the years to come, stun the world and make history. Enemy soldiers began to climb nervously out of their trenches and to meet in the barbed wire-filled no man's land that separated the armies. Normally, the British and Germans communicated across no man's land with streaking bullets, with only occasional gentlemanly allowances to collect the dead unmolested. But now there were handshakes and words of kindness. The soldiers traded songs, tobacco, and wine, joining a spontaneous holiday party in the cold night. Barnes' father could not believe his eyes. Here they were, the actual practical soldiers of the German army. There was not an atom of hate on either side. That's what happens when ordinary people step back from the environment they've been put into and recognize that they have more in common than they do things that they don't agree on. And that in tense situations that are filled with vitriol on either side and an atmosphere of hate, that something else can prevail. And as I looked up this story and I read this story, I just some of the images of this past little while in this debacle, in this theater and trauma that's playing out in Canada, came to mind. You know what, at the border crossing in Coutts, Alberta, you know, the reports are of this tense relationship between the RCMP and the protesters. And as I went down there, the RCMP were, you know, just to cover and interview truckers, the RCMP were very friendly to me. And you got the sense that they knew each other, and they did. Much like the story in 1914, these were people put in roles that they had to play for someone else's wishes. And were forced into roles by environments beyond their control that pitted them against each other when really they would rather not be. And if you haven't seen it, you have to check out the clip that at the end of when this blockade ended, when the protesters and the RCMP were shaking hands and hugging and singing "O Canada" together. It was Canada's version of 1914. And so my encouragement is to step back and separate the environment that's wanting to get us as Canadians to feel certain ways towards each other and towards other people, and to focus on people instead. I believe most of us can agree that the definition of being Canadian has nothing to do with your vaccination status. It's all around being, it's all about being kind and respectful and innovative and hardworking. That an environment that makes a means to the goal the only goal is an environment that we can step back from and say, what's the real goal? And view people through that lens. I respectfully submit that a cross-border driver in a metal cage for 13 hours a day is safe and respects people's health and safety going down the road. And as they've been essential at the early stages of the pandemic, they deserve the government's exemption and the erasing of the cross-border vaccination mandates that were imposed on January 15th. You know what? It's a call to, as Canadians, step back and instead of being influenced by the environment that's been created, just to love on each other. Loved people love. Hate spreads hate. In the next little bit, regardless of not, having to go to conversations about vaccination status or what you think about this or what you think about that, Can I encourage you that as you're out and about, shovel a neighbor's sidewalk? Pay it forward for someone at the Tim's drive-through. Tell them that you appreciate them as a Canadian. Send that message back for the coffee you buy them or the donut you buy them or whatever you do. Acts of kindness towards one another. Environments set up by others to achieve their goals do not need to influence us unless we let them. The quote of the week in my mind was from a gentleman that I would least expect it from, because even though I would never vote for his political party, I've never minded the dude. Jagmeet Singh was quoted this week as saying this, that he had disturbing reports that RCMP officers in Ottawa were showing empathy towards the protesters. He was upset and it disturbed him that they were getting along. But that's the definition of Canadian, getting along. Peaceful, kind, respectful. And as much as our politicians would like to think so, that is every much more in our hands than it is theirs. As we look forward to the week ahead and the month ahead and all the things that may happen in this situation in the future, can we keep that in mind? Love people love. We can make a difference. We can create a difference in the current situation. So driver, as always, as you're listening, you're on the road, or you're in Ottawa, or you're wherever you are, thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. God bless you. David out.
I've seen it before. Call it what you want, I'm done. Your bag's in front, and you always thought you had it all. Believe me when I say you couldn't be more wrong. But I'm already through with you, tired of this same old view. I think it's time for me to let you know. You must have lost your mind to leave me behind. I'm one of a kind, I'll have another guy in it. Now don't come knocking at my door and don't hit my phone, yeah. Go somewhere else with your remorse. I already moved on.